Well, welcome to the first day of summer and this week's edition of Near and Rupar. We are extremely excited to be joined by our guest today, veteran Iowa political expert and longtime writer Laura Belin of Bleeding Heartland is on Near and Rupar this week. And Laura, I know that in addition to Bleeding Heartland, you're also on Substack as well. So tell folks how they can find you and what the difference is between the two sites, if any.
Yes, Iowa Politics with Laura Belin is my Substack. And there, usually most weeks, I cross-post one piece from Bleeding Heartland. And then I'm also the part-time State House reporter for KHOI Community Radio in Ames. So we have a weekly radio show that's also distributed as a podcast. So on my Substack, Iowa Politics with Laura Belin, I have the weekly radio show, as well as one highlight from Bleeding Heartland. And then at the big website, Bleeding Heartland, I publish more work by me, but also I publish work by more than 100 guest authors. So it's kind of that old school Daily Kos style. It's a real community website with a lot of voices on the front page, not just mine.
Well, I love that you are keeping that old school vibe alive. That is just so awesome. But I'm also glad that you're innovating and moving on to Substack as well, because there are new audiences to be found here as well, including all the folks who have tuned into this week's show. So we should dive right in. And I want to ask you about a topic of potentially national importance, which is that very recently, the Wall Street Journal reported that there was sort of amorphous chatter that Republican Senator Joni Ernst might not run for a third term representing Iowa in the Senate. And this was really the first, at least I had heard of it outside of Iowa. I'm really curious to know, is this something that you had heard in Iowa? And what do you make of it? Do you think there's a chance Joni Ernst might bail?
I've heard a little bit about it. So last year, Joni Ernst told a number of reporters that she was likely to seek a third term. And I've always felt that she will. I still think that she probably will. But she has this annual fundraiser called the Roast and Ride that she almost always does in June. And she usually starts promoting that in February or March. And I noticed around April, I realized that she hadn't announced the Roast and Ride guest. I went to look at the website. It still had information from the 2024. So I thought, that's kind of strange. She didn't even set a date for Roast and Ride until June. It's happening in October. That event is where she kicked off her 2020 reelection campaign in 2019. So I thought that was odd. And then she did a couple of weeks ago announce that she had hired a 2026 campaign manager. But of course, our governor, Kim Reynolds, had also hired a campaign manager and I think even a finance director a month or two before she announced that she wasn't running for a third term. So I still think Joni Ernst will run, but it does make me wonder whether she's leaving the door open to possibly a better job. I've never believed that Donald Trump would really appoint her to a senior position in his administration, but she may be hoping for that. She was there on in the bleachers, I guess, at that military parade last Saturday. So she might still be holding out for something outside the Senate. But like I said, I still think she's going to run. I have heard a little bit of chatter about it, but my money would still be on her running.
So I'm curious about that, Aaron. This might be maybe more a topic for you, but we have also seen recent reports that Pete Hegseth, who of course is Trump's Secretary of Defense, is getting frozen out of foreign policy decisions. Obviously, right now is just a very critical moment, and your Secretary of Defense is nowhere to be found. And of course, Pete Hegseth, we know, is a total fuck up. And, Trump might very well have wanted to get rid of him for quite some time. But, it does seem maybe it's only a distant outside chance. I could see a possible Ernst to SecDef pipeline.
Yeah.
But of course, for that to happen, Hegseth would have to get turfed out. Aaron, do you think there's any chance of that right now?
I've definitely seen the speculation on that score. And of course, it's worth remembering that Ernst was a contender for SecDef, after Trump won before Hegseth was nominated. So that wouldn't be shocking. But Laura, I did want to ask you because, I really appreciated the big breakdown that you did recently as to why Democrats are really swimming upstream next year, just given the voter registration totals in Iowa and the propensity that Republicans actually have, which I think kind of bucks national trends to really turn out at a high clip for midterms. So, when you read that, as I did prepping for this show, and then you think about Ernst not running, I guess, the conventional wisdom with something like that would be that she would be afraid of possibly losing or having a really tough election. But then, when you read your analysis of why that's unlikely, it's hard not to come away with that thinking that she would be at least the odds-on favorite to win next year. So, I mean, do you think that really, if Ernst wasn't to run again, would that just be, reflecting a hope that maybe she could get an administration role? Or is there maybe she's such a poor candidate, especially in light of the gaffe that she had a couple of weeks back, saying of Medicaid cuts that we're all going to die anyway. So what's the big deal? That, something like that, even given the Republican advantage, could really come back to haunt her next year.
I think it's possible that, I mean, I don't know how worried she is. I probably wouldn't be that worried if I were her, but she is going to face at least one primary challenger that we know of, Jim Carlin. And a lot of MAGA people really don't like her. It's kind of funny because I mean, I view the Republican delegation, the Iowa delegation in Congress, as basically down the line, always doing whatever Trump wants on everything. And yet the MAGA people feel that these people are rhinos and, Joni Ernst. I mean, you can cherry pick. The piece I'm working on now that I hope to publish this weekend is about some of these conservative group scorecards like Heritage Action and Club for Growth. If you look at those, it can look like these people aren't really conservative enough. And so I do think she has a lot of weaknesses. She's weak on her right flank. And then that comment, I mean, we've seen the polling on this big, bad bill. I mean, I haven't seen any Iowa specific polling on it, but I don't have any reason to believe that Iowa is different from the rest of the country where people just hate this bill. People are figuring out that this is a massive transfer of wealth to the people who are already the wealthiest. So, I mean, Ernst is definitely going to underperform if she runs for reelection. So the question is like, would she underperform enough to really be in danger? You guys probably remember 2020. A lot of people had very high hopes for Teresa Greenfield. I think something like $200 million was spent on that Senate race if you include the candidates and the outside group spending. And then Ernst ended up winning by about 6 points. Well, that was not as well as Donald Trump carried the state by 8 points, but it also wasn't like a massive underperformance either. So I don't know. I mean, part of the reason I wrote that piece was to kind of ground Iowa Democrats. I hear a lot of optimism and excitement, especially after Joni Ernst made that gaffe. And I think that a lot of people are getting tired of her, but I want people to be aware of how far down Democrats really are. And it is, even compared to just 4 or 6 years ago, they're very far down.
Well, I always appreciate the cold take. I have great respect for that. But I do want to drill down a little bit into that because I don't want to get too far into the weeds. If this were purely a down ballot type of thing, I would be nerding out about the special elections. But we have seen these special elections, 3 of them now in pretty different parts of Iowa, both more urban and very rural, where Democrats have really far outperformed the top of the ticket and even flipped a deep red seat in the Iowa Senate. So it does seem, at least again from an outside perspective, that maybe there is some real unhappiness there. And, you mentioned Kim Reynolds, the governor. Also, that was very surprising to me that she said that she wasn't going to run. I see numbers like these 20-point overperformances, and I think, well, I don't know. You get half of that, maybe you're getting there in a statewide race.
I mean, stranger things have happened. Certainly there have been upsets in Senate races. It's been quite a while since a Democrat won a Senate race in a red state or a state as red as Iowa, but those overperformances are real. I think the Democratic grassroots are very excited and are going to be working very hard. I mean, you mentioned the flipping the state Senate seat, the red district. I guess I want to let people know who aren't focused on Iowa that until very recently, that district would have been a blue district, a solid blue district. Clinton County is one of these. I call them mid-sized cities. Some people call them micropolitan areas. They were Democratic strongholds for decades. These are working class towns with populations between 10,000 and 30,000. And Clinton is a classic example of where, like, a generation ago, people would have been surprised that Republicans would even be competitive in a race like that. Now we're excited that Democrats managed to win that district. So it just kind of reflects how far things have fallen. And it feels like it happened very fast. I mean, going into the 2020 election, the Iowa House was 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. Really seemed like Democrats might flip the chamber. Now it is 67 Republicans and 33. And the losses have been kind of across the board, but many of them have been in those working class towns, the places, Ottumwa, Clinton, Burlington, places that used to be, Newton is another one, just used to be very solid Democratic areas. And now Republicans are comfortably winning in those areas. So that's kind of what gives me pause. But I don't want people to think that I think there's no chance that Democrats can win a statewide election in Iowa, because that wouldn't be accurate. But I just think like you said, swimming upstream, I guess, is a way I would put it.
What is the reason for the erosion of the Democratic brand in Iowa? Is that just a reflection of some of the national trends? Obviously during the Biden years, the inflation, the upset about immigration policy, or are there some Iowa specific reasons?
I think that it's more of a reflection of a national trend. So every place in the country that looks like Iowa has had the same thing happen. If you saw, a guest author did a piece for me earlier this year about the 100 counties in the United States that had the biggest swing toward Republicans in the presidential voting from 2012 to 2024, and 24 of those 100 are in Iowa, and why they're all dominated by white voters without a college degree. So every place where the majority of the electorate is white voters without a college degree. I mean, it's why Ohio is red now. It's why Trump was able to win those big blue wall states. And it's why even Tim Walls's old congressional district is now red. Why in the Iron Range of Minnesota, a lot of those places are going red, even though the Minnesota DFL did so many great things when they had the trifecta. But I think so. I view it as part of a national trend. And I hear a lot of my readers will say, well, the Iowa Democratic Party did like this, that, and the other wrong, which certainly could be that the Iowa Democratic Party hasn't always done everything right. But if I saw Democrats still holding strong in these Youngstown, Ohio, or whatever, these type of communities nationally, but doing poorly in Iowa, then I would think, oh, what are the Iowa Democratic leaders doing wrong? But I think it's just more of the structure of the Iowa electorate makes it very difficult. And somehow the Democratic Party nationally has to rebuild that brand with that segment of voters.
I have a question for you that's been on my mind. It's a little bit of a right turn here, but last time that I was really, and maybe there have been stories since then that have been on the national radar, but the one that comes to mind for me is the Ann Selzer poll just before the election, which had Kamala, I think, winning by 3, and then she lost, I think it was by 18 in Iowa, or some huge polling error. Was it 13? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't really follow. I mean, after the election happened, I was kind of in a stupor there for about a week, 2 weeks. So I'm not totally sure. I know Trump at one point, I think, threatened to sue her, right, over the poll, which I think he alleged was election interference. But I guess I'm curious if there's been any sort of postmortem in terms of what went wrong, because that poll until then actually had a pretty good record of being at least close, but it was so far off that I'm just curious if there's been any further investigation as to what exactly went wrong there.
They did. The Des Moines Register published a lot of their raw data. By the way, Donald Trump did sue and is suing Ann Selzer Register, that corporation. So right now the suit is in federal court, and there are cross competing motions to dismiss or move it back to state court. But anyway, he sued under the consumer fraud statute, which is ludicrous. So there were a few things. The main thing in my mind is Ann Selzer had a longstanding practice of she did not weight her data based on past voting, recalled 2020 election votes. So if she just making that one change of weighting the findings by 2020 recalled vote would have had Trump ahead by 6 instead of Harris ahead by 3. So that would have still been off, but not off by as much. And I think the rest of it can easily be explained by non-response bias. I mean, Democratic leaning voters being more likely to respond to a poll. She also didn't weight her polls by education. And I interviewed her about this back in 2018. She had a polling miss in the Democratic primary for governor in 2018 and for Congress in the 3rd district. So I interviewed her about that because she never drew the sample from voter rolls. She always drew the sample from random digit dial. And we talked about why. I mean, she had very valid reasons for why she used that method. But I think in that 2024 poll, that was an example of where it just that method didn't turn out to be the best. And I think it was Natalie Jackson wrote something after the election saying that in a state like Iowa, where you have an older, whiter electorate, maybe you could get away with doing random digit dialing for longer. But this is a method that most political pollsters have abandoned.
And
So,
David, I'll let you jump back in here, but
no,
I
no,
had one other question I
yeah.
wanted to run by Lori here, and that is, David, you mentioned earlier that Reynolds is not running again, which I think kind of surprised a lot of people. She had a bit of a feud with Trump, which I could never quite figure out why Trump didn't like her. Maybe Lori, you can shed some light on that. But then also, I'm just kind of curious because I didn't track what the stated rationale was for that. I mean, especially given that it seems like although wait, I take that back because I believe there was actually some polling that showed that her approval was pretty low in Iowa. So maybe that was a factor as well. But just explain what happened there.
So she's always been polling in those morning consult polls. She's always been in like the bottom 5 governors for years now. I'm not sure why she always does so poorly. So I think the main reason for the rift between her and Trump is she endorsed Ron DeSantis before the Iowa caucuses. After initially saying she was going to be neutral, she then endorsed DeSantis and really aggressively campaigned for him, which I think was so stupid. I've yet to find anybody who's thought good idea for her to endorse DeSantis. I think she kind of believed too much in her own influence. But we were all very surprised by that because I was at a press conference during the legislative session in February where her primary challenger, Brad Sherman, this kind of wacky former state rep, had already announced. And somebody asked her, well, do you think you're going to get Trump's endorsement if you run for reelection? And she said, like, I don't know. I'm happy to be working with President Trump. And she said, but I'm going to be running on my record. I mean, literally, it was like a quote I put in the headline of my post. I'm running on my record. So we all thought that it was just going to be a formality that later in the spring, we presumed after the legislature adjourned for the year that she would announce. So I don't know. I mean, she said it was family reasons, that it was time for her to really focus on family. Her husband has been battling lung cancer. Her parents are older and not well. She has 11 grandchildren in the area. So I don't know. Like I said, she had hired campaign staff. So and I think she even told the Des Moines Register after she made the announcement that she had been planning to run, and it was just a decision she made just in the couple of months before she made that announcement. But I just have to say quickly, I was at a conference for an LGBTQ advocacy group that day, and I was supposed to lead a workshop on editorial writing at 11:15, and she had put up the video at 11 o'clock on social media. She put up the video saying she wasn't running. So I looked at my phone and I saw just a text that just said, whoa. And then I went and checked social media and saw that announcement. So I was able to announce to a room full of like 40 LGBTQ teenagers that Kim Reynolds isn't.
Wow.
So it was like prolonged applause. It was really
That's amazing.
That is so, so great. Well, I just want to remind viewers, thank you all for tuning in. If you're a paid subscriber to any of our publications, you can ask us questions in our Q&A. I also saw that Dan Pfeiffer, former Barack Obama advisor, popped in to watch. Hello, Dan. Laura, I want to ask you another question, but I do want to note to folks who are interested in these races that Democrats did land their most prominent possible candidate in the governor's race. That's State Auditor Rob Sand, who's the last Democrat holding statewide elective office in Iowa. And there's also a multi-way primary to take on Ernst or run for her potentially open seat. You got a couple of state legislators running there, State Senator Zach Walz, State Representative J.D. Scholten, who most importantly would be the biggest upgrade possible for the Democrats' congressional baseball team. He is a minor league pitcher, age 44, 45, and
45.
he's still pitching. The legislative session ended, and he went back to his team this summer, and he's still pitching, which is amazing. But Laura, the question I wanted to ask you is, we all know that Iowa is an agricultural heavy state. Ag is hugely important there. And so many Trump policies have had negative repercussions for that industry in particular. Obviously, tariffs is a huge one. But then you also have the ICE deportation raids. And those, Aaron, I'm sure you know much more about this than I do. Those seem to be more targeted at blue states or blue cities. But there's always a potential ripple effect of, terrorizing immigrants in general, which is obviously a big part of the goal. Have there been any discernible impacts from these chaotic Trump tariffs yet? Or is that something that maybe to look for down the line?
I have not heard about any ICE raids at like the major meatpacking plants or agricultural facilities that clearly have undocumented labor in Iowa. And I've been waiting to see whether they are going to be targeting any of those facilities. I think that that's probably not going to be the goal. But the tariffs, I mean, I think that the farmers, I mean, we already lost during the first Trump administration soybean farmers in Iowa lost a huge chunk of their export market when China started buying from Brazil because of the tariffs last time. And the Trump administration had this huge bailout of farmers. A lot of it went to Iowa farmers during the first administration. But I had a guest author who's a former ag reporter for the Des Moines Register, now retired, wrote something for me that the piggy bank that Trump used for that bailout of farmers in his first term is called like the Commodity Credit Corporation or something. And that fund is almost empty because of the failure of Congress to pass a new farm bill. They're like more than a year and a half overdue on passing a farm bill. So it's not even clear. I mean, the tariffs are definitely going to hurt Iowa farmers in the short term and in the long term if they lose more export markets. And then it's not even clear if what kind of a bailout. I know Trump has said that he would try to support farmers again, but I'm not sure how that would happen. And then, of course, the majority of the Iowa population who are not farmers are just going to be paying more for everything. I mean, when they have to buy clothes and shoes for their kids when they go back to school, or I mean, any number of things are going to be more expensive for people. So I definitely think that if he drives the economy into a ditch, I mean, that could cause real problems for Iowans.
We did have a question / more of a comment possibly, but in from Bruce, and I'll throw this by you and see if you have any response to it. He said, just tuning in, have people forgotten Tom Harkin preceded Joni Ernst? What's with Iowans? I'll just leave that out there for you, Laura.
But Tom Harkin was last on the ballot in 2008. I mean,
correct.
Yeah,
we're talking almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Iowa's Democrats had a voter registration advantage in 2008 of more than 100,000. So, yeah, so Tom Harkin, people throw that at me a lot. Tom Vilsack won and Berkeley Bedell won, for going back to really old time from the 70s. I mean, the reality is I think that so much has changed. And I wrote something in November, kind of a deep dive on these mid-sized counties. I was focusing on 11 of these counties with mid-sized cities. These were counties that Tom Harkin always routinely carried, even when he had relatively close reelection races. And now almost all of them are voting for Republicans. Well, all of them voted for Trump. And many of them are voting for Republicans down ballot. So, I mean, it's a complicated question, but I think it goes back to what I said earlier. The white voters without a college degree, just over the last 15, 20 years, have dramatically moved away from the Democratic Party. And that's been true in Iowa as it has been in other places.
So drilling down a little further, though, Iowa statewide obviously went for Trump by about 13 points last year. But on the congressional level, I would say that 3 of the state's 4 districts are potentially gettable for Democrats in a strong year, because the 4th district is super, super conservative. So the others, they're not exactly toss-ups anymore, but they definitely have the potential to be more competitive. And there's one race, I'm happy to talk about all of them, but there's one that I wanted to highlight in particular, which is the 1st congressional district. And this is represented by Republican Congresswoman Mariannette Miller Meeks. Last year, Miller Meeks had the smallest margin of victory of any Republican who won a seat in the House. She won by 799 votes. And this is in a district that Trump won, by about 9 or 10? Am I right?
About 8.5, yeah.
8.5, okay. We calculate these numbers, and I can't remember all 435. And
I only have 4 to remember. So.
So she ran well behind the ticket, and that's not the first time that she has underperformed the rest of the GOP. And the reason why I bring her up in particular is because the Democrat who held her to that 800 vote margin last year, Christina Bohannon, just announced a new campaign. 24 hours after jumping in, she said she'd already raised $500,000, which is just a gobsmacking sum. So my question is this, Laura: why does Mariannette Miller Meeks suck so hard? Why does she do so poorly at the ballot box?
And I do think the 1st and 3rd congressional district, and I agree, if it's like a 2006 type election, that 2nd congressional district in Northeast Iowa is also in play. But we'll stick with the 1st for now. Miller Meeks, it's so funny. I call her the luckiest person in Iowa politics because she won by 6 votes, literally, in 2020. Trump just dragged her over the line, and Trump dragged her over the line again last year. I mean, she just doesn't, there's something about her that doesn't come across as authentic. She's trying to be super MAGA. I wrote a post in March after his, the State of the Union, but they didn't call it the State of the Union, the speech that he gave to Congress. And she was jockeying so hard afterwards to try to get close to him and try to speak to him. And he didn't even seem to acknowledge her. And then she posted on social media, like, it was my honor to greet President Trump after his address. She just is. There are just a few votes that she's taken that I think MAGA got very upset about. They're still upset that the Iowa delegation voted to certify the 2020 election results. They're upset that she voted, Miller Meeks voted for a bipartisan January 6th commission, like the bill that passed and then it got filibustered in the Senate. She also was very much advocating for vaccines during the first year of the COVID pandemic. She even had clinics where she administered vaccines herself. So, but I think that the bigger thing is just that there's this sense that she's not really being herself. Like she just doesn't come across. I think she probably is a little bit more moderate, but she tries to pander and pretend like she's MAGA. She really isn't MAGA. She didn't endorse Trump before the caucuses. A lot of people got upset about that as well. So I don't know. I mean, but she is one of the most underperforming House Republicans in the country.
Yeah.
There's no question. So I agree that first district is very winnable. I think that one might be a tougher hold. If Democrats flip the first and the third districts, I think the third district in Iowa, which is the Des Moines metro area, I think that would be easier for Democrats to hold in the longer term because 75% of the population of the third district is just the Des Moines metro. And you have very well organized county Democratic parties in Polk and Dallas counties, whereas in the first district, it includes the Iowa City area, University of Iowa, and they're very well organized, but that's not nearly as large a part of the district. So you have a lot of these mid-sized cities that I was talking about. A lot of them are located in that first district. And it's just, I don't know, Democrats have a lot of work to do to rebuild along that Mississippi River corridor.
How damaging do you think, and I know you wrote specifically about this, but the big bill, I've stopped calling it the big beautiful bill because I feel like that, kind of plays into Trump's hands, but it's certainly big. So I'll give him big bill.
It is big.
But, the votes, and now, the Senate version, I don't think has been scored yet by the CBO. But it, by all accounts, is more draconian in terms of people who are going to lose health care. But I'm curious, how do you think that's going to play out in Iowa? I know you got into some of the numbers in a post that you did in terms of how many people are going to lose SNAP benefits, how many people might lose Medicaid. So maybe say a bit more about that. But then, if you think that could be kind of an albatross for these candidates next year, too.
I think that's going to be the central issue in next year's campaigns. I don't know if how many people are actually going to lose their benefits before the election, but I do think, rural hospitals, small town nursing homes, they're going to be decimated by those Medicaid cuts. And here's just an example of Marinette Miller Meeks and why people don't like her. She is on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And when they were doing the markup of that bill, that was like an all-day process, she was there for almost the whole time. And then she ducked out when they were voting on, there was a Democratic amendment specifically to take out the defund Planned Parenthood, which she just was gone. She just didn't vote one way or the other on that. That's just kind of an example of how she can be weaselly or come across as weaselly. And so I know there's already advertising in her district. Ed Tibbetts, who's a great reporter for a long time with the Quad City Times. Now he has a Substack called Along the Mississippi. He got less than a week after the big bill cleared the House, he got mailers from some group. I don't know. It was like Hardworking America. So I don't know who funds them, but had pictures of a mansion, and it was highlighting that Miller Meeks voted for that huge SALT deduction, that huge increase in the state and local tax deduction, which is really going to benefit wealthy people in high tax states like New York and New Jersey and California. And so I think that the food assistance, the Medicaid, I think there are lots of other issues with that bill that haven't gotten as much attention. When I interviewed Christina Bohannon earlier this week, she mentioned that just the massive increase in the debt and the deficit is going to drive up interest rates. And she said she cited some statistic that, I don't know if it was the Yale lab, but that they found that mortgage payers, this could cost people $1,000 more on their mortgages just because of interest rates going up because of the long-term debt and deficit outlook. So I think that it's going to potentially be a huge issue against both Miller Meeks and Zach Nunn and Ashley Hinson in that second district, if it turns out to be a favorable environment for Democrats.
Well, we are talking with Laura Belin of Iowa Politics with Laura Belin. You can find her on Substack. And once again, if you have any questions and you are a paid subscriber of any of our publications, you can pop into the comment section there and fire away. I think if you become a paid subscriber, even in the middle of this live session, you should have that chat box unlocked. Laura, you talked a lot about authenticity, and I feel like this is such a pervasive issue in politics throughout the entire political spectrum. And I feel, MAGA is a violent fascistic movement, but its true adherence, it's like a game recognized game kind of thing, I feel. And almost everyone in the Republican Party at this point in 2025 feels compelled to suck up to Trump and prove their fealty and allegiance to Trump and to show as little daylight. But there is just something about the folks who are true believers versus the ones who are calculating politicians. And I feel like Joni Ernst really falls into that second category. And, we talked about the "we are all going to die" comment, which I am certain that everyone watching this show saw. But the video that she recorded in the graveyard
Oh,
the
yeah.
day after, which was
In the graveyard.
so fucking obnoxious. But
It was.
but I watched that whole thing. I mean, it's a minute long, and she just seemed like she was trying to cosplay as
Yeah.
MAGA. That was the vibe that I got. That this not really in her heart. She's not like a Ken Paxton, the Attorney General from Texas. She's not like that kind of politician. She's doing it because she feels she has to, not because she wants to.
And I agree. That was for an audience of one. I realized that I forgot to mention in the context of Miller Meeks, she could lose her primary. She only got 56% of the vote against a MAGA challenger last time who raised almost no money. This guy is full scale, election denier, MAGA, and he's running again. I don't know if he can raise any money, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility that she could even lose the primary. But going back to Joni Ernst, I think that everything that happened with that town hall to me reflects the importance of people really showing up and challenging.
Yes.
I went to one of Joni Ernst's town halls, and Ernst and Grassley, they do these in smaller towns in red counties. They never hold these open town halls like in Des Moines or Ames or Iowa City or Waterloo. They have them in these smaller counties. So I went to one she did last summer in Winterset, which is a small town not far from Des Moines. And there was maybe one person who asked like a slightly negative question, but everything else was like a love fest for her. So I think that what happened at that town hall is after about 45 minutes of people pushing back and calling out her lies and jeering and booing, that's why she got frustrated. I mean, she didn't walk in there intending to say, well, we all die, right? She walked there in to tell the lies that she was telling about the illegal immigrants on Medicaid or, whatever else she was saying about the bill. But she got so flustered. And in trying to undo the damage, I think, like you said, to me, it looked very fake. It didn't look like her heart was in it. And I have no idea what Donald Trump thought about it, but I'm sure that was the audience she was going for.
Yeah, and it's worth, in this context, bringing up that, the first rule of Trumpism is never to apologize about anything.
Right.
So,
Right.
whereas 20 years ago, a politician makes a gaffe like that, maybe you just post a video or, release a statement kind of saying, I misspoke or, I was flustered, whatever. But, kind of the performative non-apology and kind of like doubling down. And then, I saw the clip when she posted on Instagram, but then ended up sharing it on my other social channels. And I had to like kind of look at it close because I was like, is she in a graveyard?
Yeah.
Because you could kind of see the headstones behind her, but I didn't want to tweet that if it wasn't accurate. And then, I was convinced that it was, but, just the setting for it. I don't know if she ever explained why she was in a graveyard, but, the whole thing was just, and then also, this appeal to Christianity in the context of like dismissing people losing their health care, which will lead to people dying. I mean, seems kind of flagrantly unchristian, but, again, I think that's kind of Trumpism in a nutshell.
It was very weird, and multiple people that afternoon, like, messaged me asking, "Was this like AI generated?" Like they thought it might be real. I was also a little bit hesitant to share it, but it was on her actual Instagram channel. But
Yeah.
I heard about that as well. It just seemed bizarre, and it's hard to use humor in politics, and she didn't use it successfully. Nothing about that landed, right? I mean, it just wasn't. I can recognize when a Republican has like a successful video or ad, and that was not it. And so you saw J.D. Scholten. I mean, he was planning to get into the Senate race after baseball season, but he jumped in. Like my dad used to say, when the pie is being around, that's the time to take a slice. And I think it made a lot of sense for him to just go ahead and announce that Monday, even though he didn't have everything lined up and he didn't have a slickly produced launch video or anything.
I couldn't agree more. I felt exactly that way about J.D. Scholten, just jumping in, striking while the iron is hot. And we'll know in a few weeks because the second quarter of the year is about to come to an end on June 30th. July 15th, candidates will have to file their second quarter fundraising reports with the FEC. So we'll see how We'll see how well JD Schulten does. Aaron, what are you cracking up
Oh,
about?
this
Now
is
you're gonna be
a
loud.
great comment here from Larry in the comments who says, and I actually did at some point want to turn to Grassley here, but Larry writes, 91-year-old Chuck Grassley on the committee to look at Biden's cognitive health. I would question Grassley's hypocrisy, which is, yeah, that's pretty great. But has Grassley has he closed the door and running for another term, or is he
Oh
going to
my
be like
God.
is he going to be simultaneously the oldest senator
No,
and the oldest American still living, or what's
yeah,
going to
so
happen
funny.
there? Like,
Yeah, he has not officially said. It really is hilarious. One of the reasons why I think it's important for Democrats to make a real run at the second district is that Ashley Hinson there, I firmly believe she's planning to run for Senate. I think she will run in 2028, assuming Grassley's seat is open. I think if for some reason Joni Ernst doesn't run for a third term, I think Ashley Hinson would be in. So I think it's really important to challenge her and make her have a tough race. But yeah, Chuck Grassley, I mean, he does. I will say that his office does still have decent constituent service from what I hear, which I've never heard about Joni Ernst's office. Like no one's ever, a lot of people have told me, well, I don't vote for Chuck Grassley, but when they needed help with something on some government thing, that Grassley's staff were genuinely helpful. And that has been part of his brand that I think is, when you think about if you've been in the Senate since 1980, how many thousands of Iowans probably personally know someone who was helped by your office on something? I think that's very helpful.
With the few minutes we have left here, I did want to ask one question about the Democratic side of the aisle, because we think back on the last big Democratic presidential primary in 2020 and the Iowa caucus, which was kind of a fiasco where Bernie and Pete Buttigieg, I think they're still trying to figure out who won that. It was never entirely clear who won. And then, there was some talk from the DNC about kind of moving Iowa further back in the primary process. And now, of course, it's still is a long ways off. People are getting excited about 2028. There'll, of course, be a competitive Democratic primary. So has there been any resolution of like where Iowa's going to fall on the calendar for that, or how that's going to work? Maybe in hopes that there's not a similarly kind of a result that's unclear next time around.
Well, I've been telling Iowa Democrats, I feel that people need to stop focusing on trying to get the caucuses back. The DNC recently removed Iowa from the Rules and Bylaws Committee, where somebody for at least the last 3 or 4 presidential cycles, Iowa always had a representative. So New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada still have 2 seats on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, which is going to set the calendar, and Iowa doesn't have any seats. So to me, that's a pretty strong signal that the DNC is not interested in returning the Iowa caucuses to the prominence they had. And I think that the reason, Julian Castro really laid out the arguments against the caucus process. It's very disenfranchising. And I think that if Iowa were still a swing state, maybe if we have some good Democratic results in 2026, that could be an argument that Iowa could make to the DNC. But I just think the DNC is moving away from caucuses and is going to be looking at more diverse states than Iowa.
Laura, you mentioned something earlier that I thought is so important in regard specifically to that Joni Ernst town hall. You talked about the importance of showing up because you never know what will happen when you show up, but maybe something like that happens. Maybe you force your opponent into really, really screwing up. And Aaron, this is obviously something that you encounter all the time when you're looking for those moments that you want to share. The more often that Democrats, for instance, are showing up to hearings in Congress, as opposed to going off and doing something else, the greater chance they have of embarrassing a witness, embarrassing a colleague. And so I'm curious, Laura, did you go to any No Kings events last weekend, or did you cover them? And what did that all feel like in Iowa?
So I had committed months earlier. There was an Iowa Secular Summit last Saturday that I was on a panel for. So I did not go to the No Kings, but I want to give a shout out to Nathan Sage, who's also running for Senate, was the first Democrat to declare for Senate, because that Ernst Town Hall happened at 7:30 in the morning. It is like a 2.5 or 3 hour drive.
Wait, really? 7:30 in the morning?
30 on a Friday morning. See, she's hoping.
Ugh.
She's in a red county early in the morning. She's hoping to not get, I'm sure she didn't expect an auditorium full of hostile people, but Nathan Sage drove up from where he lives. He was there. And like you said, you never know. It turned out to be a national news event. You wouldn't anticipate that anything that newsworthy would happen at the town hall. But I like the hustle. I'm not endorsing anyone in any of these primaries, but I like the hustle of him making sure that he showed up. And he came out, he filmed a social media video, right? He was like, I was just at Joni Ernst Town Hall and I can't even believe what I just heard. And, said some other things that, you wouldn't repeat his kind of brand. He's the plain
We don't have any rules against that on here, Laura. This is not a family show.
Right. Well, anyway, I can't remember the exact words, but like what he said about Trump sending the Marines into LA, he said it's fucking insane. I mean, that's what, he said. I think he said something that Ernst doesn't give a shit about us. Like it was very clear from what she said that when she said we're all going to die, she just doesn't give a shit about any of the people on Medicaid. It was something, that's not an exact quote, but it's very similar. And he was there, so that I think it is important to show up at these things and maybe even that could play into Joni Ernst's decision on whether she wants to run for reelection. But meanwhile, she has this MAGA person breathing down her neck, the same guy who ran against Chuck Grassley in the primary and got about a quarter of the vote against Grassley without spending any money, really, with raising hardly any money. He's also big election denier, super Trumpy type Republican. So he's going to be pounding on whatever the votes that they don't like that Joni Ernst, she voted for the Respect for Marriage Act or a handful of other things she voted for that they don't like. I mean, it's just comical to me because she's voted to confirm all of Trump's people.
Yeah.
I mean, I see her as just a complete Trump loyalist, but that's not how MAGA world sees her.
Yeah. Well, and especially when her big issue was sexual misconduct in the military, and then she ends up voting for Hegseth, which I think kind of gave the lie to that. And, I posted a clip even this week when Hegseth was testifying. I mean, she was still kind of, asking questions about sexual misconduct in the military. And it's just kind of farcical when Hegseth is the witness, and we all know his history. But I was going to mention the other day, you mentioned, David, that this isn't a family show, but I believe it was the Josh Marshall podcast I had on in my car, and I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and he said, I believe it was his show, he said shit. And my son immediately was like, what does that mean? What's shit, Dad? So I had to explain, like, oh, it's a bad word. Yeah, so you never know with kids that age what they pick up on. So if you're in the car with your kids and they're asking you about what shit or fuck means right now, I apologize for
that. Aaron, your kids are growing up.
Yeah. Too quickly.
Laura, one last question before we wrap. We've talked about a lot of races, the most prominent high-profile ones. Are there any contests, if you could pick one contest that maybe folks are not paying so much attention to, that you think we should be keeping an eye on this year and next in Iowa?
Well, I mentioned the 2nd congressional district. I think that's a real sleeper. I mean, everyone is watching the 1st and the 3rd districts, but I am keeping an eye on the 2nd district. I mean, of course, I'm always very interested in state legislative races. There are a bunch of interesting ones. Mostly in the suburbs of Des Moines, I would say, and then a couple in these mid-sized cities. I kind of want to see whether Democrats, I mean, this Mike Zimmer, who flipped that Iowa Senate seat in January in that special election, very interested to see if he can hold that. That's going to be kind of a difficult hold, but that would be a very encouraging sign for Democrats if he's able to hold on to that Iowa Senate seat.
Well, we have been talking with Laura Belin, who publishes the Substack Iowa Politics with Laura Belin, and also is the publisher of Bleeding Heartland. You can, of course, find Laura's Substack in the app. If you have not yet subscribed to the Down Ballot, my publication, please do so. And if you have not yet subscribed to Aaron's Substack, Public Notice, you can find him, all of this in the Substack app. He's publicnotice.co. We are the-downballot.com. Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your Iowa insights and wisdom. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. We had 700 folks this week. Awesome turnout. And have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. See y'all next week.